What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video. Today we're going to be going over the Stamina Sorcerer, one of my personal favorite stamina classes to play. Stamina Sorcerers bring to the table quite a bit of AoE damage, so Stam Sorcs are pretty much widely considered to be the top tier Stam DPS when it comes to AoE damage, much like their Magicka Sorcerer counterparts. However, the great AoE damage does come at a slight price of slightly lower single target damage, especially when you compare them to Nightblades. So Stam Sorcs also kind of aren't very good if you are kind of looking for a lot of class abilities. Sorcerers only really have one stamina ability, two really if you count Dark Deal, three if you want to count down Armaments, but they only really have one active ability that they use as part of their rotation. So a lot of people have been complaining about Stam Sorcs for a while because of that, but it doesn't seem like this is going to be changing anytime soon. That being said, like I said, Stam Sorcs are one of my more favorite Stam classes to play. In this current Nightblade meta, you don't really get a chance to use them all too much. So, just like our other build videos, we'll be starting off with gear, then we'll go over our skills, our CP points, so we'll talk about everything you guys need to know in order to make this build your own. Now, I do want to kind of take this time to say that this is optimized around an organized raid group. So we do have Alkosh, we have very good Alkosh uptime, and you have very good Infused Crusher uptime. So if you are not able to, you don't have these same sort of debuffs, you might need to play around a little bit, kind of get your penetration up and things like that. So just keep that in mind, and I will kind of tell you guys some different substitutions that I would make here and there depending on the specific scenarios, because the sets that I'm wearing right now are kind of very specific to certain fights, and while it is the strongest setup right now, it is not necessarily the strongest setup for every single fight. It all going to depend on the specific scenario, so I'll be going over that as well. So first, starting off here with our gear, we are using Stormfist. Stormfist has some nice synergy with Stam Sorcs. With the changes, we found Armaments back in, I want to say it was Somerset. Stam Sorcs moved to a light attack build instead of kind of a heavy attack build. So as a result, Stormfist, the stamina regen that you get from Stormfist becomes very, very useful in order to help us sustain. It also has a very good synergy with the Stam Sorc as well, because of our Implosion passive, which procs off of shock and physical damage. So whenever you deal damage, you have 10% chance to create a Thunderfist to crush your enemy, dealing X amount of shock damage every 1 second for 3 seconds. All enemies within 4 meters, and a final X amount of physical damage when the fist closes. So the problem with Stormfist is in fights where the boss is moving around a lot, it will not be quite as strong, because a lot like Lambrus, the boss needs to basically be staying within that fist in order to get the most out of Stormfist. So in those scenarios where the boss is moving around a lot, stamina is already kind of at disadvantage because you have to chase the boss. But in those scenarios, you're better off running something like Selene's or even Meladreths instead, because at the very least, Selene's will proc off of melee damage, so that way you're pretty much going to be almost guaranteed to be right up against the boss. And with Meladreth, because the spores do travel, that does give you a little bit of leeway when it comes to mobility when the boss is moving around. Sometimes you can kind of aim your spores proc to a point where you're able to hit them even after the boss has moved. So those are kind of the two other monster help sets that you might want to consider using instead of Stormfist. So Stormfist is very strong, but again, it's only if the boss is able to stand still and stay within that proc. For our 5-piece set here, this is the body set, so this is going to be active at all times on our body, so you need 5 pieces on the body or the jewelry. It's going to be Relequen, so Relequen is still very, very strong, so it is definitely the best set for stamina DPS right now. You can go with the perfect version or the imperfect version. The difference between them is that 5-item set bonus of the max stamina. The imperfect version doesn't have this, while the perfect version does. Now I do want to point out here that Relequen is not necessarily going to be the best option for each fight. So if you need to basically swap targets very often, so a very good example of a fight where Relequen might not be very strong is the twins in Maw and the fourth boss, the triplets in Hoth. Because you're swapping targets so much, you don't really have the opportunity to stack all the the wins on a single target. So Relequen does lose some power there when you have to swap targets very often. So in those fights, you might want to run one of the other minor Slayer sets. So those would include Vicious Ophidian, perhaps, or you could possibly even use War Machine, although I personally wouldn't use War Machine on the Stamp Sword. Vicious Ophidian would probably be the next best option if you want to maintain that minor Slayer. Otherwise, you can go with something like Hunding's Rage. You can even go with Automatons. Automaton has very nice synergy with Samsorks because of the boost to physical weapon damage, and a lot of our damage is from physical weapon damage sources. So you can go with Hunding, you can go to Automatons. You can even go with something like Twice Fanged Snake if you want to run the Warrior Edge and Mundus instead, although that does kind of come at the cost of when you put Relequen back on, you are going to be well below the penetration cap. So that's something you want to watch out for there. So you do have several options when it comes to that body piece set. Now for our weapon set, so this is going to be the front bar set here. It's going to be Ravager. So the Ravager is a PvP set, so you do need to buy it or get it off of Rewards of the Worthy. You can buy it from the, if your faction holds Blastarius in Cyrodiil, you can go buy boxes of Ravager, random Ravager pieces. So you will want 3 body pieces, and then you want double daggers on the front bar here. So why Ravager? Why not use Advancing Yokeda? So swords don't have 10% additional crit damage, so that kind of lowers the effectiveness of Advancing Yokeda a little bit. But you also have to consider that in order to sustain our light attack rotation, we actually have to use Dark Deal. And Dark Deal does have a channel associated with it, as about a 1.1 second channel. And that's going to be on our back bar. So Advancing Yokeda will drop off if we're not on our front bar, basically when we're on our bow bar. So for standard DPS, you always have 3 abilities on your bow bar minimum. So that's 3 global cooldowns, or you can think of it as 3 seconds. With Dark Deal, you add 1 global cooldown, so that's 4. And then with the channel, when you add that on, that's 5. So no matter what, you are going to end up dropping that Advanced Yokeda set on the back bar, no matter what. If you're running Dark Deal, and if you're Stamp Sword, chances are you will be running Dark Deal in order to sustain a light attack rotation. So that makes Ravager a little bit stronger up here. The other thing too is that our spammable Shrouded Daggers does actually proc Ravager, so we do have additional chances to proc Ravager. Relequen is still counting as melee damage, so Relequen will also proc Ravager here. So if you're not using Relequen, then Ravager actually does lose a fair amount of potential here. So if you're using something like Hunding's Rage or Automatons or VO, then Ravager's not going to be quite as strong, and that's when you will want to use something like Advancing Yokeda instead. So I would try to get both sets, Ravager and Advancing Yokeda. Ravager is going to be strongest when you compare it with Relequen, but if you're not able to use Relequen, then you can go with Advancing Yokeda instead. If you don't have either of those sets, because they are fairly difficult to obtain, you have to farm for Advancing Yokeda and Ravager, then you can go with Acuity instead if that is the only kind of option that you have there. Acuity is a crashable set, so it is easier to obtain those 5 pieces there. It might have lost some of its power due to changes, but it's still a fairly decent set to use if you don't have Ravager or Advancing Yokeda. Now, before we move on to weapons, I do want to talk about our armor traits and enchants. So because Ravager does have a max health set bonus there, the 3-piece, we actually don't need to run any enchants, attribute points I should say, into health. We still need to run one heavy piece with a max health enchant, so I have a heavy head with a health enchant on my shoulder, and that's just to get as close as we can to 17k max health. Remember, Stam don't have any shields, so we do need a little bit more health compared to magic DPS in order to give ourselves a little bit more survivability overall. Other than that, all of our armor traits are going to be Divines and max stamina, so you just want that one max health enchant on a small piece of that shoulder, hands, feet, or waist. Now for our jewelry glyph, going with 3 weapon damage enchants. Stamp strokes actually have very good sustain. You can see here our stamina regen is 1606, which is pretty high. This is with Dubious Command Throne and the additional regen from Stormfist. So if we use Selene's instead, it'll obviously drop a little bit. But with Dark Deal and with Dubious, this is actually Stamp strokes actually have very good sustain. So you don't need any sort of stamina regen glyphs at all. So it's all weapon damage. So I do have 1 Bloodthirsty and 2 Infused. You can go with any combination of those 2 traits. So 3 Bloodthirsty is usually going to be the strongest combination of traits. Infused will give you a little bit more front-end DPS, so basically from 100 to 25%. And it's still going to be useful, obviously, during execute phase. So you can really go with any combination, 3 Infused or 3 Bloodthirsty or anything in between there. Now for weapons, we are going with Double Dagger. Double Daggers is still going to be the strongest combination right now. You can obviously go with Dagger Axe or Dagger Sword if that's all you have available to you, but Dagger is the strongest combination of weapons right now. Our front bar is still going to be nirn honed, but we do have the disease damage enchant on our front bar now instead. And that is because our poison damage enchant is now on our back bar bow enchant, because now Endless Hail on the bow bar will actually proc the bow enchant. So that's why we have poison or prismatic enchant on the back bar there. So we decided to use disease on our front bar as another source of DPS. We can go with something like absorb stamina instead for additional sustain. So if you're running something like Selene's and you need to sustain because you lost the regen there from Stormfist, by all means you can go with absorb stam. It's actually pretty decent for helping out your sustain, and then it's not bad for DPS either. It just won't scale to your CP. The damage won't scale to your CPs. For our offhand, we have a precise dagger with a weapon damage enchant. So the enchant on your offhand remains the same between Somerset and Wolfhunter. It's still weapon damage, it's just the trait has changed. So instead of infused, it is now precise. And that's because they fixed the bug where Infused on your offhand was affecting the enchant on your main hand. It was affecting the cooldown, so your enchant on your main hand is going off twice as often. Now, in terms of traits here, you can go with Nirn Precise. You can still go with Nirn Infused if you'd like. It's just not going to be quite as strong. Or you can go with Infused Precise instead. So those are your three main options when it comes to traits. But Nirn on your main hand, Precise on your offhand is going to be the strongest, just because it'll scale better with Warhorn buffs. The Nirn boost to your weapon damage compared to the Infused stronger enchant. And finally for our back bar, still going to be the Maelstrom Bow. This time it's going to be infused with a poison damage enchant. We're no longer using double Ravage health poison, so the Nirn is no longer going to be very useful for us. So instead we're going to be going with Infused, because like I said, back bar weapon abilities will now proc back bar enchants, and it will actually remember whether it was an infused enchant or not. So we are sticking with an infused poison damage glyph, just so we have constant poison damage enchant procs going off. You can replace this with a Master's Bow if you'd like. Master's Bow is going to be a little bit more consistent, because Maelstrom Bow power does rely on the boss being able to stay within your Endless Hail, but if you can get the boss to stay within your Endless Hail, the Maelstrom Bow does usually beat out the Master's Bow. Now for the character sheet here, so this is kind of just generic character information. We are Red Guard. Red Guards are the strongest race when it comes to stamina DPS right now. Just because of the additional sustain they get. So because a lot of stamina DPS right now are shifting to a light attack builds, the additional sustain that you get as a Red Guard is really coming into play here. There are other races that you could run instead that are going to be a little bit weaker, but still very strong in terms of stamina DPS races. The first one is going to be Khajiits. So they don't actually get any sort of max stamina boost. They get 10% additional stamina regen, but their big factor here with Khajiits, their strongest point is that 8% additional weapon crit. So they get basically a nice boost to their crit damage. But the downside is they do have lower resources and they do have lower sustain compared to the Red Guard. Bosmer, the Wood Elves are another option there. They get 6% max stam and 21% additional stamina regen. So they do get less stam overall than the Red Guards. Red Guards get 10%. But they do have a much higher stamina regen than Red Guards. Red Guards only have 9% additional stamina regen. That being said, the Red Guard's Adrenaline Rush, that return for stam from direct damage every, I think it's every 7 seconds or something like that, 5 seconds, that still outweighs that additional 12% additional stamina regen that the Bosmer have. And if you do have access to the Imperial Edition, and you can play as Imperials, they're not a bad choice either. They get 12% max health and 10% max stamina, so you're able to basically run all of your points in stamina no matter what combination of gear you have. The downside is you do lose out on the regen, you do lose out on a lot of sustain as an Imperial. So speaking about our attributes, so I mentioned earlier that since we're running Ravager, we don't need to put any points into health. If you're not running Ravager, so if you're running Advanced Yokeda instead, then you will need to put points into health here in order to kind of make up for that. So you will need 10 points into health. So it'd be 10 health, 54 stamina if you're not running Ravager. If you are going to be running Ravager for the entire, all your fights, then you can go with 64 into stamina. so that'll give us close to 17k max health, which is kind of what we want to hit here. For our mundus stone, we're going with the Lover, just because of the changes to Night Mother's Gaze and Thunder Flame. Those are not unique debuffs anymore, so we do need to use the Lover in order to get up to the penetration cap. Now, if you do intend on running Twice Fanged Snake as one of your sets full time, then you don't need the Lover, in which case you will be swapping over to the Warrior instead. But if you're not running Twice Fanged Snake, then yes, the Lover is going to be strong. Now for food, we're using Dubious Comoran Throne here. You can use the, the Artaeum Takeaway Broth, which is the gold version of Dubious, so it's just a little bit stronger than Dubious Comoran Throne, but it is very expensive to buy right now because it does use several rare alchemy ingredients from Somerset. So it's still very expensive to buy, so don't bother using it if you can't afford it. Dubious Comoran Throne is pretty good. It'll get you through all the content in the game. Now for our skill bars, starting off with our front part here, we have Rending Slashes, Shrouded Daggers, Rearming Trap, Hurricane, Bound Armaments, and Flawless Dawnbreaker. Obviously we won't be using Flawless Dawnbreaker as our damage ultimate. This is here for the additional weapon damage boost. Then on our back bar, Razor Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Dark Deal, Bound Armaments again, and then we have Greater Storm Atronach. So you could use Ballista instead if you would like. Greater Storm Atronach synergizes very well with you. Because it is an ultimate, it will scale off of your weapon damage and not like your max magic or anything like that. The damage that it deals is shock damage, so it will not proportionally be affected by your CPs, but the big advantage of running Storm Atronach is the synergy that it provides. So basically grants whoever activates the synergy as well as the Atronach Mage Berserk for 8 seconds, so that really helps out your fellow DPS if they're able to get that synergy. So when you're using Storm Atronach, make sure to drop it kind of next to the group. You don't want to put it between the group and the boss, just because when it starts to despawn, it actually counts as an entity, which means you won't be able to DPS through it while it's despawning. So just make sure you're throwing it to the side of the group so they can still hit the synergy, but when the Storm Atronach despawns, it won't affect DPS at all. So that's kind of it. There's not really much flexibility when it comes to our bars here. The only flexibility that I would really consider is going to be this back spot here, Bound Armaments. You can swap this out for another ability if you'd like let's say Rearming Trap or Vigor if you want an additional heal, but generally speaking, Bound Armaments is going to be the strongest choice here on your back bar. Now for our champion point distribution, the CP cap is now 780, which gives us 260 points to put across each of our 3 different constellation types. So starting off with our green CPs, 75 Mooncalf, 75 Tenacity, nothing has changed here compared to previous builds. That leaves 110 points, which you can put into the remaining nodes really however you'd like. So I have 40 Shadow Ward, 40 Tumbling, and 30 Warlord, but you can kind of place them wherever you really like. You can even bump Tenacity and Mooncalf up to 100 if you'd like. Now for our blue CPs, I do want to reiterate here that this is a build that is optimized around having good Alkosh uptime and good Infused Crusher uptime. So that's why my CPs are distributed the way they are. If you do not have good Alkosh uptime, if you don't have good Crusher uptime, then you might need to put some more points into Piercing. So you're going to have to play around that a little bit depending on your specific build. Now, because a lot of our damage as a Stamp Sword does come from Thaumaturge, dots I should say, you're going to want to keep pretty good points up in Thaumaturge. Precise Strikes you can drop a little bit here if you'd like, if you do need to put points into Piercing. So you can drop like Precise Strikes down 56, you can even drop Mighty down 56 if you need the additional points for Piercing. But I'd probably ideally take them out of Mastered Arms too, so drop Mastered Arms down to 51 or 48 if you need the additional points into Piercing. So for me, I have 56 into Mastered Arms, 61 Thaumaturge, 61 Precise Strikes, 18 Piercing, and 64 into Mighty. And finally for our red CPs. So this particular setup that I have here is kind of a balanced approach, so it will give you pretty good mitigation across all the trials, but it is not optimized for any specific trial. So if you need to optimize yourself for, let's say, VMAW, you will need to shift some CP points around depending on what your raid lead wants you to put them in. But there is kind of an optimized red CP distribution for specific trials. So here I have 66 into Ironclad, 48 into Thick Skinned, 64 into Hardened Elemental Defender, I have 18 into Bastion, so you can actually probably take 8 points out of, I don't know why I have them into Bastion of all things, so you can put them into Quick Recovery actually and bump thick skin up to 56. So this is what it actually is. So it should be 66 Ironclad, 56 thick skin, 64 Hardy, and Elmo's Defender, and then 10 into Quick Recovery here, and this is just here for the Field Physician passive. So you typically won't be asked to resurrect people as a stamina DPS, but you might as well grab this passive anyways, just in case you do end up resurrecting somebody. Damage reduction is pretty nice to have here. Speaking of damage mitigation, one thing that you guys might have noticed here is that this bar setup does not include Deadly Cloak, so we decided to drop Deadly Cloak in favor of Hurricane on the front bar, so that way we can keep Bout Armaments on the back bar. However, if you do want to have Deadly Cloak for the additional damage mitigation, then you would basically put it in place of Hurricane, and put Hurricane in place of Bout Armaments here on the back bar. So if you are going for just strictly the strongest amount of DPS, the most amount of DPS, you will not need Deadly Cloak, and instead you will be running Hurricane on the front bar, and then you'll have Bout Armaments double slotted. But if you do want to run Deadly Cloak, because it is a progression style run, then you will replace Hurricane with Deadly Cloak, and move Hurricane to the back bar and get rid of Bout Armaments. So let's talk about our rotation. The rotation is pretty straightforward. So back bar rotation is pretty static. You're not really going to change too much on the back bar rotation. It's always going to be Endless Hail, then Razor Caltrops, followed by Dark Deal, and then Poison Injection. Because Poison Injection does inherit the damage from the bar that you're on when the first stick happens. So if you bar swap cancel out of Poison Injection, it will use the weapon damage on your front bar, which is higher than the weapon damage on your bow bar. And then on your front bar here, you're going to go Rending Slashes, and then you're going to basically spews Shrouded Dagger until you need to re-up Rearming Trap and Hurricane. Now Hurricane is a little bit weird in terms of timing because it has a 15-second duration, but everything on your back bar, so that's Endless Hail, Poison Injection, and Razor Caltrops, these don't have very good timings that line up very well. So your bow abilities both have 10-second durations, Caltrop has a 12-second duration, Hurricane has a 15-second duration. But you don't want Hurricane to fall off at all, because Hurricane is a very powerful source of DPS here. So what you're going to do is you're basically going to, right when you need to swap to your back bar to reapply your dots, you're going to re-up Hurricane. That'll basically allow Hurricane to last as long as it possibly can, because each consecutive tick does deal more and more damage, so you do want it to run as long as you possibly can before you re-up it. So a good example of this, I'll just do a quick kind of like go through my rotation twice, back bar rotation twice kind of thing. So you do want to open up with Rearming Trap, obviously. And again, you do want to place the Atronach kind of to the side here, so I'd kind of place it like over here for DPS or stacked where I am at. So it's going to be Endless Hail, Caltrops, Dark Deal, Poison Injection, then you do Rending Slashes, Trap, Hurricane. Alright, and you can see Hurricane's about to expire, re-up it, then you go back to your back bar rotation. So now you'll be able to see, you can see here that the duration of Hurricane and the tail doesn't really line up. So I'm going to swap. So I re-up Hurricane and kind of give up that additional damage from that last 2 seconds there of Hurricane. So that's what I mean, and you guys will be able to see this more when we do the 6-man dummy parse. You'll be able to kind of see what I'm talking about when I say re-up it right when you swap to your back bar to do your Endless Hail, just so you get as much duration as you possibly can out of Hurricane and get those bigger ticks going. Alright, so once we're out of combat with this dummy, there we go. Go ahead and do a 6-man dummy parse to get an idea, so you guys can get an idea of what the rotation will look like in a longer fight, as well as kind of see what kind of DPS you're able to pull with a Stam Sorc in comparison to other builds. Now, one thing I will take note of here is because this is a solo parse, I do not have Major Fracture. Some classes do have their own source of Major Fracture. Wardens have Major Fracture, DKs and Lamplights have Major Fracture. So this is going to be lower than those 3 classes. So I will do a little bit of quick math to kind of tell you guys what you could expect to pull if you were using Major Fracture. So just bear that in mind when you guys take a look at the DPS at the end here. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started with this parse here. And remember, the trap does have a kind of wind-up period, so to speak. So when the timer on trap here, if you are using action duration or light, I should mention. When the trap duration is about 2 seconds left, that's when you want to re-up trap. Or recast trap, I should say. You can see here what I mean when I say that Hurricane has a very awkward timer. My abilities for not casting there. Hopefully that won't affect the parts too badly, but if it does, I do have a couple of parts that I have saved. I was doing a little bit earlier. Kind of preparation for this kind of eventuality. See here that the order of my front bar, like when I am reapplying things, it's based more on the timer than actual any sort of set rotation. You can just get an idea of how good the sustain is on a stamp sort there. So that actually didn't affect our DPS quite as much as I thought it would. So these were a couple of parts that I did earlier just to kind of familiarize myself again with the rotation that I had set up. So you can see here you're pulling on average around 39.5k DPS or so. And this is again without major fracture. So if you want to take major fracture in consideration here, I did the math earlier, and it's about a 9 to 10% increase in DPS overall. So if we take the more conservative estimate, which is an additional 9% DPS, then we are looking at basically an increase of about 4k or so. So if we had major fracture, then we'd be looking at maybe around 43.5k or so, something around those lines, 44k perhaps. So it's not bad DPS. It's obviously lower than Nightblades. Nightblades are capable of 150k plus, but it's still pretty decent, especially when you consider that that's not taking into consideration Minor Berserk, which Nightblades also have in their arsenal. So if you take a very optimistic scenario, and let's say we do 44k, and then we have Minor Berserk, which is another 8% additional DPS, and let's assume that it is actually 8% more, then you're looking at probably around 48k or so. So it's not that far off from Nightblades. Nightblades, the best ones that I've seen, have been able to pull 52, 53k, so it's still quite a ways away, but Stamp Works are fairly strong overall. So a real quick look at our combat metrics. Armaments Relequen is still very strong. Light attacks, Shrouded Daggers pretty strong here. So you do want to make sure you're weaving, obviously, on your front bar, and make sure to get all those light attacks down. They do make up a pretty sizable amount of your DPS here. You can see that Hurricane is pretty up there. The poison weapon, this is your poison enchant on the back bar and the build bar, does do a lot of damage. So that's really important that we keep up Endless Hail and or Poison Injection while we're on our front bar, because both of those abilities will proc our poison weapon, poison enchant on the back bar here. Now, if you guys are wondering about the disease enchants, it's pretty far down on the DPS list here, and it's not terribly surprising. Disease is not quite as strong. It just barely out DPSs the poison status effect that is applied from poison injection and our poison damage enchant here. So if you feel like you need to sustain, don't feel like you have to run a disease enchant, you can run an absorb stamina enchant. It'll obviously be a little bit less DPS, so because it's not scaling off your CP, but you will get better sustain out of it. You can see here that our regen versus rate is really nice. So Stamina Swords overall pretty decent DPS, very nice sustain overall, pretty comparable I'd say in fact to Stamina Nightblades, especially when you are a Red Guard. So that's where they are. They're really good at AoE DPS. It's just they don't really bring that much utility to the table outside of the Atronach with the Mage Berserk buff and synergy. So that is it for this build video. If you guys have any questions about the builds, Stamina Swords in general, feel free to leave a comment down in this comment section below, and I'll try to answer to the best of my ability. And if I don't know the answer, then I'll try to find somebody who can and get back to you with that answer. That's it for this video. I hope you guys found it informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.